Welcome, everyone, to Renew Northeast's first On the Line event. I'm Francis Polaro, president of Renew. Thank you for joining us this evening. We have a great turnout for this occasion where we're looking to open the dialogue to a complex topic that is the transmission of electric power. Renew has been around for more than a decade working with clean energy and nonprofit organizations. While we are steeped in energy planning and policy, we know that these energy topics can be challenging for local communities to stay abreast of. And for that reason, we at Renew, we want to be a resource for local communities to stay up to date and be able to respond to energy developments to provide their thoughts and input. The On the Line campaign wants to hear from you about what information, programming, and partnerships would help your communities benefit from this changing energy landscape. And my colleague, Nathan Rake, will tell you more. Nathan.
Thank you, Francis. My name is Nathan Rake, Manager of State and Local Affairs here at Renew Northeast. Before diving into Renew's On the Line campaign, I want to provide some high-level information about the current New England energy landscape. As the region transitions from a grid that is primarily fossil fuel driven to one fueled by clean energy resources, and state policies encourage adoption of electric vehicles and electrification of home heating, New England will need 2 to 3 times the current amount of electricity to meet rising demand. This increase is driven by state policies to meet statutory clean energy and decarbonization goals. This year alone, the collective 6 New England states have introduced more than 36 bills and regulations addressing energy topics such as renewable integration, grid reliability, and energy affordability. However, the current electric grid cannot accommodate the electricity needed to satisfy this demand. That is why new high-voltage transmission projects are being developed. These projects will enable the transmission of clean, reliable, and affordable electricity to flow from northern Maine, offshore wind, and Canada to the region's population centers. With this in mind, we would like to hear from you. What topics are you most interested in learning more about? Thank you, everyone, for your participation. As Francis mentioned, we are building a network of community leaders and advocates who care about local impacts of energy infrastructure development. Check out our webpage, which includes a feedback form to share ideas, information on upcoming events, and additional resources, with more to come. Now, it is my great pleasure to introduce Heather Goldstone. Heather is the Chief Communications Officer at Woodwell Climate Research Center and Vice Chair of the Falmouth Select Board.
Good evening, everyone, and thank you, Nathan, and to Renew for having me here to moderate this evening and having us all here for this really important conversation this evening. I've been working in the climate space for over 15 years, starting off as a science and environment reporter for WCAI. Did a lot of these sorts of events, and during my tenure at CAI, learned a lot about our energy system, about climate change, about the needs that we have to transition to renewable energy. And then about 5 years ago, I made a shift. I've been at Woodwell Climate doing communications there for several years, and then just over a year ago joined the Falmouth Select Board. And I would say from all of those different positions, have been able to see really what the needs are of communities for information, and the fact that we don't always have the information that we need to make the best decisions and to really have productive conversations. So I'm thrilled to be here this evening to moderate this conversation. We will get to audience questions a little bit later, and we do ask that you put those into the Q&A function. We'll leave plenty of time for those questions. But first, I want to kick things off by having each of our panelists introduce themselves a little bit. And I'm going to start with Paul Niedzwiecki. He is the CEO of the Cape Cod Chamber. And Paul, could you just tell us a little bit about how your work with the Chamber intersects with the issues of climate change, renewable energy, and grid transmission that we're going to be talking about here this evening?
Absolutely. I'm Paul Nizwicki. I'm the president and CEO of the Cape Cod Chamber of Commerce. We represent 1,400 businesses across the Cape. And we are come to this issue because on the Cape, the economy is the environment. And that's sort of been our mantra for quite some time. So we're very interested in all things environment. And we've just sort of taken on the Cape Cod Climate Collaborative, working more closely with them. So we're ready to move forward on this issue. It's an important one, not just from an economic position, from a workforce position, but keeping the Cape safe.
Great. Thank you so much, Paul, and thank you for being here this evening. Chris Pawicki is our next panelist with Cape Cod Sierra Club, among other things. Chris, if you'd like to tell us a little bit about yourself and how you come to this issue.
Sure. Thanks, Heather, and thanks to Renew Northeast for inviting tonight. As an energy consultant and an advocate, I've researched and monitored and participated in numerous siting and permitting processes for clean energy facilities in Massachusetts, across the US, as well as authored white papers and guidance on what are the benefits of clean energy projects and what are the life cycle environmental health and safety concerns associated with utility scale infrastructure. And this includes wind and solar generation, transmission line and substations, as well as battery energy storage facilities. Generally, new and expanded infrastructure is needed to meet load growth, interconnect and accommodate variable renewables, and ensure reliability, resource adequacy, and resilience. For developers, site selection depends on technical and business considerations, such as grid and market access, and on feasibility assessments addressing land availability and permittability. Regulators and jurisdictional authorities are responsible for keeping the lights on and managing impacts on energy bills and the environment, while also meeting energy, air quality, and climate change goals. Recently, permitting timelines and upfront investments for project developers have substantially increased due to local opposition exacerbated by political polarization, misinformation, and disinformation. It's also become clear that the energy transition needed to stave off the worst effects of climate change must occur rapidly and at massive scale, and must avoid further harm to historically marginalized communities. These developments highlight the inherent tension between local control and higher level mandates, a tightrope that the Commonwealth hopes to navigate through siting and permitting reforms. Addressing the concerns, needs, and wants of potential host communities during project planning and siting, not as an afterthought or on a pro forma basis, has potential to be both more effective and also more efficient. So I appreciate the opportunity to participate in this on-the-line webinar as a starting point toward deconflicting, siting, and permitting, and also localizing benefits from responsibly developed clean energy projects.
Great, thanks, Chris. And everyone's already getting a sense of the range of issues that we're going to be able to bring into this evening's conversations. We've got the business perspective, we've got energy and environment advocacy, and then our final panelist, Barry Scheingold, with a bit more of the community perspective from the town of Barnstable Energy and Infrastructure Committee. Barry, if you would tell us a little bit more about yourself and your work.
Sure. Thank you, Heather, for moderating this, and thank you for Renew for sponsoring this webinar. Yes, I'm Barry Scheingold. I live in the town of Barnstable and serve as chair of the town's Infrastructure and Energy Committee, which is an advisory committee. But I'm here speaking solely for myself. I spent my entire career in the energy field. I worked on an early climate change study for a consulting firm under a National Science Foundation contract 50 years ago. Later, I was a legal intern to the predecessor agency of the Massachusetts Energy Facility Siting Board when it first got started. After working decades in commercial and regulatory matters, I oversaw as independent evaluator long-term competitive bidding processes for clean energy projects and associated transmission, including the first 3 offshore wind procurements for long-term contracts held in Massachusetts. And although I retired a few years ago, I've retained an avid interest in these matters. So that's me.
Great. Well, thank you so much. I'd love to start with what I think is one of the biggest questions, and one that feels both obvious and yet rarely has a really clear answer that everybody agrees on. So we'll start with the easy things, right? So and Barry, I'm going to start with you. What does success look like at the community level when we are talking about renewable energy transition?
Well, I think, like a lot of things, success looks like at the community level depends on your perspective. And there are some people who view a transmission project or generation project and their impacts as being so problematic, success is simply defeating the project. Uh, but likely the majority, myself included, are at least open to a project in their community and would like satisfactory answers to a number of questions. And here are some of my questions. So what is the project? What are its likely and possible impacts? Has it been adequately explained? Is the project, its owners, and the information providers credible? How can potentially negative environmental impacts be avoided or mitigated? On the other side, what are the project's benefits? Dealing with climate change is important, and reducing greenhouse gases in the aggregate is required under state law. So what is the impact of the project on greenhouse gas emissions? What are the benefits in terms of grid reliability? What are the benefits to the community in terms of taxes paid? What is the permitting process and associated timing? How can my town participate in the process? How can I participate in the process? What is the community outreach plan? Can I receive good answers to my questions and those of my fellow residents and public officials? Should the town enter into a host community agreement? Now, there are benefits in entering a host community agreement that you're not necessarily entitled to just going through the regulatory process. You can get better environmental mitigation measures. You can get compensation for impacts that can't be mitigated. And you can get financial and other tangible benefits from the developer. And the town of Barnstable for the Vineyard Wind and the Park City Wind or New England Wind 1 projects did enter into host community agreements. And the latter project, it was amended to, from the town's perspective, to improve both mitigation measures and benefits. And what is the process that the town should follow in negotiating such an agreement, which is an important question. At least at a very high level, I want to know what are the key milestones that need to be achieved for the project to be built, and what are the key institutional and governmental approvals that are required. Now, this isn't an exhaustive list of questions. I would say at a high level, success is being comfortable that environmental concerns have been properly addressed and an approved project will have no significant adverse impacts in the environment, while also having net benefits to the community. And that's, again, this is from a local perspective. Thank you.
Thank you. I really appreciate that. And I love the definition of success as being having enough information to make a decision, not necessarily what that decision should be, being the definition of success. I think that actually, if we took that approach more often, we might actually achieve or feel like we're achieving success more often than we sometimes do. So thank you for that perspective. Paul, I'd like to go to you next with the same question. From your perspective, what does success look like at the community level?
Well, from our perspective, success really starts with early, transparent, and ongoing dialogue between the developers and the community. Offshore wind developers have to really go beyond the formal permitting process and engage with local residents, fishermen, environmental groups, and businesses in order to build trust. So, from our perspective, developers need to show that they're listening, not just informing. And we've seen that when developers co-create solutions with communities, whether it's fisheries mitigation or local workforce training, that projects gain legitimacy and support.
Thank you. I think a lot of overlap there in those two answers. But what stood out to me, going beyond what's required for permitting, and the importance of listening. That it's really dialogue. It's not just talking. It's listening as well. I appreciate that. Chris, last but not least, over to you. How would you define success at the community level?
Well, I think Barry and Paul made some important points. I think that, one of the things that's clear when you look big picture at renewable energy project siting and transmission project siting and pretty much siting anything these days, it's not enough to be proactively communicating. It's not enough just to comply with regulations. And even if you get a permit approval, that doesn't mean that the public is going to accept the project, because permit decisions are usually made elsewhere. So one of the things that I think increasingly developers need to turn to, and with state support, is what's called a social license approach, and that's where you're essentially securing community consent to build and operate. And this approach was initially developed in trying to site nuclear power plants and nuclear waste facilities. Now, I know renewable energy projects aren't at that level, nor are transmission projects, but there are a lot of people concerned about some and have very valid concerns about projects. And then there's some misinformation and disinformation, as I indicated earlier. But it's just not enough to sort of run a solid process these days. So this sort of follows on what Paul said. Dialogue begins early, and it's also should begin before a specific site is selected. And I think this is the direction the state is moving in with its permitting reforms. And traditionally marginalized and underrepresented groups need to be brought to the table. And also, it's important to include recognized community leaders, as well as people who self-identify or are identified by the community as leaders. You can't just pick the people who commonly speak up at public information sessions and expect them to, or elected officials, and expect them to actually represent the community when it comes to something controversial. Two-way conversations should start from a broad context, and addressing the issues that local people are actually concerned about and interested in, rather than the topics that are identified by community officials, project developers, and their consultants. The community is interested in a whole lot of things, and in a lot of cases, it's about survival, it's about energy affordability, it's about being able to pay for my next meal. It's not about where the cable goes, or how tall the wind turbines are, or how they impact mammals, or the EMF considerations in the case of transmission projects. It can be from a range of directions. And then trust building is really important. It starts with demonstrated commitments, as Paul said, to transparency. And also, when I say demonstrated commitments, you have to not just commit verbally, but also demonstrate by your actions that you are interested in transparency, broad and meaningful engagement, not just holding an outreach session, but having conversations and dialogues. You're committed to localized benefits and to impact mitigation and risk reduction, leading to environmental health and safety protection. A lot of the opposition comes from environmental health and safety issues or economic concerns. And without two-way conversation, trust, and open dialogue, it's hard to get beyond some of the opposition and get to a real discussion about what the community benefits might or could be as a means of moving a project forward.
Thank you for that, Chris. And I think you've laid out there a lot of the recipe for what can make for a successful conversation, but also what a lot of the difficulties and obstacles often are. So maybe I'll start with you with a second question, which is, given that we know from experience that these conversations can be difficult, they can be controversial, why is this something that we need to be tackling on Cape Cod? What is at stake? What are the opportunities unique to our region? And why is this something that's worth doing and that we need to do?
Well, obviously, the offshore wind resource base is what has attracted offshore wind developers, and also the need to interconnect projects and upgrade and expand our transmission network to accommodate that that offshore wind that's coming in. But it's not just resource availability that makes this an important issue. Stepping back for a minute, obviously the Cape has this unique energy geography. We are extremely vulnerable to climate change, and we have an abundant resource. We have an opportunity to actually do something positive that benefits our economy and our environment. And the conversation needs to happen sort of proactively instead of reactively, because reactive conversation does not, meet those social license tenets I mentioned earlier. Reactive conversation immediately sets up an almost opposition framework, even if for people who are just asking questions, they might be perceived as opposition. And so proactive is really important. And I think, people might not be aware of this, but the largest energy storage project, the first actually utility scale energy storage project in Massachusetts, the Cranberry Point Energy Storage Facility in Carver, is scheduled to go online this year after almost 10 years since the siting process began. The site in Carver was selected in 2017, but an alternate site was a sand and gravel pit in Falmouth next to transmission infrastructure. So large-scale battery storage projects only require a couple of acres. And because of the wealth of renewables and the need to accommodate and handle variable solar and wind in the southeastern Massachusetts region, this isn't going to be the first energy storage project that's proposed. And so it's really important for the community to understand what battery storage is, how it works, and why it's being proposed for a region like this. It's really a transmission asset in a way, because it allows bulk power from offshore projects or solar projects to be made available when needed to serve load, but it's already connected to the grid. It's not generating new energy. And so we just need to be having this dialogue now so that when the next project proposal comes, we're prepared to engage constructively and ask the right questions, basically address all the points that Paul and I and Barry discussed earlier.
And I might follow up on that a little bit. You talked about the importance of beginning the conversations proactively. You just said now's the time to do that. At the same time, we're seeing a lot of headlines saying that, there's a lot going on at the federal level that can pose obstacles to renewable energy development. Is there an opportunity in this moment? Why should we be engaging in this conversation now, as you just said?
Is that for me or for Paul?
Yeah, for you, and then I'll jump to both Barry and to Paul with both of those questions.
So one of the things that makes this, I'm going to say, pause in renewable energy development beneficial is that there's time to take a step back and try to do things differently. I don't know if we'll have a chance to discuss this tonight, but as of now, every offshore wind project has to bring its power onshore individually. That ends up with multiple interconnections. If there's time to think about it and do it in an organized and coordinated fashion, we might be able to bring more offshore wind in at a lower overall cost by building an integrated transmission network and integrated feed line from offshore that connects multiple projects. So this sort of pause gives us time to reconsider what we've been doing and see if we can do things differently in the future. Not just like how many cables we bring in, but also the approach that's used by developers and by utilities in reaching out to communities and discussing what might happen in the future and how they can participate and benefit.
Great, thank you so much. Barry, I want to jump over to you with a variant of this why Cape Cod, and then also the why now question. Obviously, the town of Barnstable has gotten into these conversations, decided that it was worth it and it was needed. And I understand you're speaking it as an individual tonight, but based on your experience in that process, what do you see as the answers, the why we should be engaging, and whether there are opportunities in this particular moment to advance the conversation?
Okay. Yeah, so I think this was a question that a lot of people asked. I mean, there are there are three projects that propose to make landfall in the town of Barnstable. There's the Vineyard Wind Project, 800 megawatts. That is in construction. There's New England Wind or Park City Wind that basically has its permits. It has a proposal for a long-term contract that's pending. The third one was New England Wind 2, which would make landfall at Thousand Beach, which is a much earlier stage of the process. But to answer the question, why Cape Cod? So there was there are a number of developers that have leases off Massachusetts and Rhode Island. ISO New England did a study a number of years ago, and they thought without making major reinforcements, there were approximately 6,000 megawatts that could be connected. 2,800 megawatts are to Cape Cod, to Barnstable, or to the west at substations there. So that's a big part of it. We have in Massachusetts required competitive procurements for long-term contracts. They're required every other year. These contracts are necessary to finance these projects. So there's a lot of support for that. And it's not surprising that developers have focused on Cape Cod as as a place where they would make landfall for their cables, and also to interconnect the substations here. So with regard to battery storage, similarly, in Massachusetts, although this is more recent, there's competitive procurement, competitive bidding processes for long-term contracts for battery storage that will be getting underway soon. And I agree with Chris that we're going to be seeing more of those. So that kind of will address the why here. In terms of the timing, yeah, there may be somewhat of a hiatus. The administration is proposing legislation that would allow the Department of Energy Resources to go out for procurements or competitive bids for different types of resources, have more flexibility in doing that. So we'll see whether something like that passes. In terms of the transmission grid, you have transmission projects. There was an Eversource expansion that was for reliability purposes, and just recently that was amended to allow that project, the transmission projects, to increase its voltage and interconnect to offshore wind projects that could be connected to it. So you have projects that are transmission that are both for reliability and for delivering increasing loads, as well as for connecting to offshore wind. So I hope that answers the question. And I guess I should add one thing. These projects are either adding transmission to existing rights of way for the utilities, or they involve underground cables. These are generally much less impactful to the environment than overhead transmission, and generally, historically, has been less objectionable. So let me close with that.
Great, thank you so much. Paul, last but not least, over to you with this question of why Cape Cod? What's at stake? What are the opportunities? What's our obligation or our opportunity here, and why now?
Well, we have the wind, so that's a good reason to sort of look at Cape Cod. But Cape Cod is also at the end of the grid. Our aging Cape Cod Canal bridges are not the only critical piece of infrastructure that we have. Our electric grid is fragile, and it's vulnerable to extreme weather. And offshore wind can bring local generation closer to where it's needed. We already have a maritime economy, ports, technical expertise that make the Cape and the islands really uniquely suited to support offshore wind staging, maintenance, and operations. And additionally, Massachusetts has a legal mandate to achieve net zero emissions by 2050. And offshore wind is the only scalable renewable energy source that can help us hit those targets while boosting the local economy. So that's why I think Cape Cod is the right place. Why now? I think this is a critical point. I mean, especially in the Mid-Cape area in the town of Barnstable, where we've seen the landing of these transmission lines and one of them done successfully without much pushback and the other really fighting an uphill battle. It's an opportunity to get it right. You know, offshore wind is new. It's new to people. It's new technology. It's complex technology. And so I think some of the things like Chris referred to the state's permitting reform efforts around citing these projects, it's critically important to get this right. You know, that we get the planning, the community engagement, what community host agreements should look like. All of that needs to happen, but we've also had some blades fall off of some of the projects that are out there now and wash up on beaches in Nantucket. And these are things that, if we don't get it right, could really compromise our ability to close on these important climate goals.
I think that's a great point. So I want to just pause here for a moment, and to those of you watching, if you have questions, we are going to jump to your questions in just a moment. We'll have about 20 or so minutes for those. So do put your question. We'll jump into some of your questions. Please keep putting them in the Q&A. We already touched on this first question a little bit, but maybe a little bit more to dive into. And the question is, how does the geography of the Cape affect the methods of clean energy that are pursued? And obviously, a lot of the focus of this conversation, a lot of the subtext has been around offshore wind. We've also talked about battery storage, but of course, we've also seen pretty dramatic growth in solar in our region. So does anybody want to jump in with any more thoughts on how the geography of our region helps shape the renewable energy mix that has been pursued, or perhaps that might be appropriate to pursue?
Well, I'll just jump in that there's another offshore wind area, the Gulf of Maine, and I was hearing concern that people thought that developers would interconnect to the Atlantic side of the Cape. And basically because the grid there is relatively weak, it's really not a plausible place to interconnect. So we're not going to, I don't think we'll see any projects that will have transmission cables interconnecting to the Cape from the Gulf of Maine. I think that will be Plymouth or Boston or areas north of that.
Okay, great. And Chris, I think I saw you come off mute as well.
Yeah, I'll definitely agree with that. And you know, the interconnections are coming into Barnstable, which is our biggest load center, and where the grid is at its most robust, especially after the approval of the upgrade of the new Mid-Cape line that runs from Barnstable to Bourne to operate at 344 kilovolts. That'll handle a whole lot of offshore wind. It'll allow Park City Wind or New England Wind 1 to actually interconnect and operate and send its power to the west. I think in terms of solar, we've seen projects on landfills, and we've also seen a lot of rooftop solar. We are seeing quite a few larger projects being proposed that are converting golf courses into solar projects, converting sand pits to solar projects. You know, some of that, taking a sand pit and turning it into a solar project, I think that's a step in the right direction. But you know, we are cutting a lot of trees, and with the property values here, we are going to continue to add a lot of solar. At one point, I think the Cape was the leading region in the state for solar deployment, but we're not going to be able to add a lot of large projects. So the large projects are going to be limited to offshore wind, and that's, you know, the real sort of big pole in the tent if we're going to make a difference in contributing to the energy future of the state. Offshore wind is what we can contribute.
Well, Paul, anything you would like to add on that front?
Other than the obvious, I mean, the Cape has over 500 miles of coastline, and even the way that it bends, you know, the bathymetry is different, whether in Cape Cod Bay or Nantucket Sound. Nantucket Sound's somewhat shallow, but the Atlantic coast, you sort of get that drop off pretty immediately. So different opportunities for sighting wind there. And then I would agree with Chris a lot on the solar projects that we've seen pop up. If you look, you know, 86% of the land on the Cape is either currently developed or protected. But if you look at some of those areas that might be available for development generally in the future, golf courses, gravel pits that are mined out, and cranberry bogs. And so I think we should be considering solar as an option for what to do with some of those landforms on the Cape that we know are going to be reused.
Maybe addressing kind of the flip side of those comments that are more around where there are opportunities. One question, noting the increased demand for electricity in the region in the future, and that did get mentioned early on. What impacts will there be if we do not see significant transmission build out and new energy resources brought online? And what alternative scenarios are there, or, you know, are there alternative scenarios, I guess, being considered or worked with?
Well, you know, I think what we're going to see if we don't, you know, increase supply to meet demand are clearly brownouts and impacts on any sort of economic development, impacts on residents generally. You know, I spent 10 years at the Cape Cod Commission, which is a regional planning agency and a regulatory agency, and there was a sale of a gas company that on the Cape. And when the new company came in, they found out some of the pipe was smaller than it needed to be. And it resulted in a moratorium from Yarmouth down to Provincetown of any new gas hookups. So, you know, I think these are the kind of things that we can expect if we don't address the demand issue.
Yeah, and I think that absent new clean energy resources to the region, either coming from the Cape and Islands to the mainland, or being built on the mainland, or being imported from other states, we're going to continue to burn a lot of fracked gas, methane gas, which is has high global warming potential. Gas pipelines always leak, and gas plants, when they are operating, they release CO2. So, you know, the alternative is not just potential for high costs and brownouts. It's also for continued reliance on fuels that do not support our decarbonization goals. And it's really important to take a step back and look at the state's decarbonization strategy, which rests on electrifying vehicles and heating of buildings. And if we're continuing to rely on natural gas for electricity production, then electrification doesn't gain us as much as it could. If the electricity is instead from offshore wind or solar, then, you know, we have a real significant greenhouse gas emissions reduction when we electrify. And so there's no possible way to meet our state goals without either generating clean energy within the state or from offshore, or importing from elsewhere. And I did see that the Healy administration is looking north to Nova Scotia for possibly securing offshore wind in the future. Canada's way behind the US in evaluating and moving forward with the permitting of offshore wind projects. That is a long, long time away. Even if the current presidential administration you know, kills every offshore wind project, we might still be in 4 years ahead of Canada in terms of their processes. So offshore wind is not coming from Canada anytime soon. There's still an effort to under construction to bring hydro in from Canada. Canada has suggested that maybe it doesn't have as much hydro to share as we might want it to. There are geopolitical considerations with Canada. I find that shocking to say now. And so I think it's really incumbent on this region to do what it can to contribute. And that means not just sort of accepting offshore wind, but really pushing proactively and aggressively for responsible offshore wind development that generates localized benefits. And that means we have to start to look at a different type of benefit than we have before. But I'll leave that for later potentially.
Barry, I saw you nodding along. Would you like to
Yeah,
chime in?
I would just add, just that I've had some experience with this, but interregional um, intermittent generation and transmission projects have their own difficulties institutionally and scheduling, and very few of those projects have gone forward, although I worked on one that did, but it showed how difficult it was.
Excellent. So there's an interesting question that ties into some of our early themes about information availability and information sources, for that matter. A question around kind of each of your assessment of the available of information about the public health and safety of electrical transmission projects. Do you feel that that information is sufficient, that it's getting out there? Or do you have thoughts on how to make information about the public health concerns that sometimes come up, make that information available to communities?
You know, I think I just give an example, probably from the town of Barnstable's perspective, and I think a lot of people in the community, one of the areas of most concern was dielectric fluid from the substation getting into the environment through a leak or explosion, and then getting into the groundwater and contaminating it. And I think the town has negotiated, and I think Eversource and Park City Wind have really gone beyond the state of the art in terms of the containment facilities. But I think probably what is not very well known, I think the Eversource's expert basically said that even if it did get outside the containment, it would take over a year to travel the distance to get into groundwater, which would be plenty of time to mitigate that. So there have been a lot of concerns that have been stated, but I think people haven't seen or heard of some of the studies that have been done and the work done that may alleviate those concerns.
So it sounds like maybe you think there's more information available than is actually getting to communities.
Yeah,
in
there's
some
more
cases.
information, and the extent, yeah, you can have studies by experts done on these issues of concern. That's great, and the information needs to go out to the community as well.
Paul, do you want to chime in there?
I think this is really one of the most difficult parts of the challenge in citing these facilities, because the information is available and it's there, and it's often presented at public meetings, but there's often contrary information presented as well, and so then you wind up in a debate about which report is the one that we should believe. So, based on the public hearings that I've been in the town of Barnstable over the siting issue, I think this is it. I mean, there are a lot of people out there that are opposing these projects really because they don't want it in their backyard. And they're promoting any argument to stop the project. And the public safety one is the one that really sort of scares people. And so it's an effective tool, but in the public meetings, the information is often presented, but you can tell it's often not believed. So I think not only do we need to make sure the information is available, we need to find a better way to convey that information.
Yeah. And I think, Paul, this is where I'm hopeful about the permitting reforms, because in the town perspective, you have open meetings and public comments. Even where you have information, it hasn't gone through an adjudicatory process where it's been subject to cross-examination. And so at the same time, you have the siting board has these adjudicatory proceedings where you have expert reports. It goes through a review process subject to cross-examination. but by consolidating the processes, hopefully there'll be a better dialogue about this factual information, which I think has really been lacking,
Yeah.
and really to your point as well. So,
Chris, any last thoughts on this topic?
Well, I think one of the challenges is that when information is presented in a public setting, it's often by the developer or the developer's consultants, or in the case of Barnstable, where residents essentially said we don't trust town officials. It was in some cases town officials sharing out the information, or maybe the Mass Clean Energy Center would come in with some information, and you've got the individuals who are opposed to the project basically saying it's the developer, it's the state, and it's the consultants, and all of this is bought and paid for already because the government has certain goals. So I think all the information in the world, unfortunately, won't address some concerns. And what's really important about taking an alternative approach to community engagement and outreach is to have a place for constructive conversation about moving forward with mutual benefits and mitigated impacts, while at the same time trying to address the concerns of people who are never going to be mollified. And there needs to be somewhat of a balance for that. I'm not sure what the answer is in terms of who provides the information. I've seen surveys indicating that nonprofits entities are, and in some cases, but not all cases, universities are looked at as viable sources of information. So it's really important to sort of get beyond this polarization landscape and sort of the idea that anybody who supports addressing climate change must be a demagogue of sorts. You can't have a rational argument when that's what's presented against you. And so at a certain point, you can't win. And so you have to move on and make sure that constructive dialogue is happening next to the one that is taking up the air in the room, which is not constructive and is really not going to go anywhere positive.
Well, this is definitely an area that Renew is stepping into and really committed to. And I want to make sure we leave a few minutes for some closing remarks from our hosts at Renew. But I think perhaps the most common question this evening has been one that I'd love to get a quick thought from each of you, which is how can communities and community members who support renewable energy projects and transmission projects get involved and help ensure the success of these conversations and of the projects. Barry, do you want to kick us off there?
well, how can you get involved? I think you can engage with developers, you can engage with the town, you can be like me and volunteer on advisory committees. But I want to just add one other thing that uh, there's a lot of debate about how realistic some of the environmental risks may be. And even though they may be somewhat remote, but developers can come up with a plan that's credible, that even if a relatively remote risk occurs, that it will be well managed. I think that'll go a significant way. And that's been some of the debates that have been had over offshore wind in the town of Barnstable.
Chris, your thoughts on how communities and community members can get involved productively in supporting these projects?
Well, I think obviously coming to public meetings and speaking out and expressing support is really important. We don't have, as I was sort of surprised by reliance on local media because we don't have as sound of local media as we might like. So I don't know. Letters to the editor can be constructive. I just feel like when you have a chance, speak positively about these projects to your neighbors, to your friends, to your relatives. If there's misinformation, try to combat it. People do learn a lot by word to mouth. There was a whale that had been washed up on the Brewster Flats last fall, and somebody, as I walked up to the whale, somebody said the wind turbines did it. And it's like, okay, this is Cape Cod Bay. The wind turbines are south of Nantucket. The wind turbines didn't have anything to do with this. And so I asked, where did you get that information after I explained those things? And they said, well, the person who was standing next to the whale said that. It's like, okay, well, if you rely on the person standing next to the whale, that's not always the right answer. Rely on trusted sources. And that's why I think as an individual, if you have friends and neighbors who have questions and you have information to share, it's worthwhile doing so.
And Paul, over to you.
Yeah, well, there are a lot of ways to get involved locally. We have 15 climate action networks, one in each town. Cape Cod Commission does a regional policy plan that's easy to participate with. But I would just want to note that when you look at the opposition to these projects, primarily their use in social media. So there are a lot of these town-based Facebook groups, for example, that aren't always the most pleasant places to spend time. But that's where a lot of the misinformation really takes root.
Yeah,
Well, thank you. Thank you, Paul, Barry, Chris. We are running out of time here, just a few minutes left till the top of the hour. And I do want to make sure that we are able to hand it back over to Nathan and the team at Renew for a few closing thoughts.
Thank you, Heather, and thank you everyone for joining us this evening. Before we conclude, I want to highlight one comment Barry made about the need to get studies and information out in the public. This is exactly what On the Line is doing. We want to provide communities with the information necessary to understand these key energy issues. Please join me in thanking our panelists for a fantastic conversation this evening, and thank you for attending. Please use the QR code on the screen or email me if you have any additional ideas about topics, locations, organizations that we can partner with for future programming. You'll be receiving an email with a survey in the coming days. Thank you for joining us and have a wonderful evening.